Thomas, Mark Hedges, thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Now, he may be known to millions as one of the most talented actors around, but these days Michael Sheen is almost as well known for his forays into Welsh politics. This week he was in Merthyr at a lecture for the Learning and Work Institute, where he re-asked the question, who speaks for Wales? Well, it's obviously an important question in terms of the development and devolution and other issues, not least of all Brexit. So when I caught up with him before his talk, I began by asking him what points he was trying to make.
The Raymond Williams lecture, and Raymond Williams's work was, well, I suppose his international reputation wasn't really based on what he wrote about Wales. It was more, broad-based than that. But specifically for this lecture, I've been reading everything he did write about Wales, and what he did write was incredibly influential. And one of the pieces that he wrote in 1971 was called Who Speaks for Wales? So I've sort of taken that as my starting point. And really, what I found so fascinating about reading Williams's work is he talks about it's how the past and the present relate to each other that is most telling about a culture. And so in looking at things like Welsh identity, Welsh history, Welsh politics now, you have to go back to the past. You have to see it within the context of the past and see how those two things come together.
So what element of the past do you think most sort of has that ability to shape where we are now then?
Well, I think, when the work that I've been doing over the last few years in Wales, going and visiting people, seeing projects that are going on in communities, talking to people in Welsh government and different organisations and voluntary sector, I've got the opportunity because, I suppose, of my small amount of celebrity, I have an opportunity to meet a lot of different types of people and see what's going on. And one of the things that I've come away with is a sense of a sort of infrastructure or an institutional framework that is a little bit delicate, it seems. It's not quite as developed as it could have been. Certainly not when you go to places like Scotland. And so in looking at, well, why is that the case? All you have to do is start going back into history, and you see that there have been moments over the last, since the Roman invasion, where the beginnings of something, the beginnings of a sort of nation state, or at least the first steps towards that, start to emerge time and time again, and are stopped at a certain point. You can go back to the laws of Hywel Dda, or you can go back to Llywelyn ap Gruffydd, or Owain Glyndŵr, and then by the time you do get to Henry VIII and the Acts of Union, 1536, something changes fundamentally there, and Wales is, to all extents and purposes, assimilated into England. For Wales, see England. That famous encyclopedia 1888 entry. That's all it said, 4 words. For Wales, see England. And so there's a reason why there is a certain kind of, it seems to me, a reason why there is a difference between what we have in Wales now and what was in Scotland. Scotland had a monarchy. We didn't. Scotland had a parliament long before we had an assembly. And so there is a sort of institutional framework that wasn't there, a history of that, And when you look at things like, the first time we had the referendum about assembly powers, 1979, 12% of our electorate voted to have that. It was a resounding refusal to start the process of having our own powers, And then you think, well, what changed between 79 and 97? And, we know Thatcher government and everything that happened in the South Wales Valleys areas and around heavy industry, and seeing how vulnerable a position the country could be in, But then even then in 1997, it was less than 1%, just over 0.5% difference in that vote. So I find that sort of fascinating. And then looking at the Brexit vote again, in terms of the history of the relationship between Wales and England, it's remarkable to me that when it comes to the Brexit vote, unlike Scotland or Northern Ireland, Wales voted virtually in lockstep with England. Now, nothing about the rights and wrongs of the way of voting, but I just find that fascinating, that given that tortuous relationship between the two countries and the dominance of the English culture on Wales, what's that all about? How did that happen?
Well, so do you reach an answer then? What is it all about? Why was that happening then, do you think?
Well, I think there's a number of reasons for it. I think some of the things I explore within it is the idea of, I never got taught Welsh history at school. everything I'm talking about in this lecture, I've discovered over the last few years, essentially. You know, I can remember being in school and being told to write an essay about, you know, it starts, you are a Roman soldier on patrol in a hill fort in Cleon. What do you see? And now I think, who cares what the Roman soldier sees? What about the Welsh people? What do they see? Why are we not looking at it from our point of view? You know? So a disconnection, Williams talked about discontinuities within the Welsh identity. That disconnection from your past, understanding what is going on in the context of it, I think is really important. So that's one of the things. But I think most importantly is the fact that the opportunities for us as a nation, as a people, to talk to each other, have these conversations, argue them out, explore them, are so limited. You know, a lot of our media comes from England. As you know, this program is tagged on to the end of a program coming from England. And so all the fantastic work, and I love the work that you do. I think it's amazing. I'd love to see more of it. I'd love to see more opportunities for these conversations to be inclusive of the diversity of Welsh experience, to be able to set it in the context of Welsh history, and then look at where we really are at the moment. You know, so there needs to be more of that. Local journalism has completely collapsed across Wales, completely. In Port Talbot, in 1970, we had 5 newspapers with 11 reporters, all based in offices in Port Talbot. Now we have none. And that is not unique. You know?
So you think that the fragilities you were putting it of the institutions in Wales, it's a lack of sense of self for Welsh people, which is leading to that. Is that the point you make?
Well, I think we've had difficulty in reckoning with our past, partly because of outside influences. I think, you know, the fact that Welsh media is a reserved power for Westminster. That's obviously, you know, I think you could say there's a disinterest in Welsh infrastructure coming from England. It seems like that at times, but also from within. I think partly because we have two parties, the two main parties in Wales, Welsh Labour, Plaid Cymru. There's such a danger of overlap that the carving out of political space, I think, in some ways, has led to a restriction in what the parameters of our discourse are, what we can talk about and what we can't talk about in a political sphere. And then, in order to have local communities engage in that, the opportunities for that have been so restricted. So I'm not saying it's all in any ways on purpose, but in terms of the incentive to develop more inclusivity, more outreach, I'm not entirely sure what this incentive is there. Why would anyone be incentivized to develop local journalistic infrastructure, greater accountability for government, greater scrutinization of what's going on? Why would they want to incentivize? Why would they be incentivized to develop that? Now, I'm not saying they don't want, you know, it's conscious, but you just look at the kind of currents within Welsh culture at the moment, and I think there's a certain stasis going on that maybe is holding us back in some ways.
I just have to say, the Conservatives would certainly argue that they're the third main party in Wales, that it's not just Labour and Plaid Cymru, looking at their electoral sort of record. How do you get over that then? If you accept the point that you're making, okay, that there's a stasis, there's a lack of stuff happening there, how do you overcome that?
Well, I think, you know, greater engagement. When I've gone to various, you know, public service deliverers or anyone in authority really, certainly since the Brexit referendum, all you hear time and time again is we must listen more. We have to listen. We haven't been listening properly. And it's as if listening is something you can just do like that. You have to learn how to listen. I spent my life trying to learn how to listen. It's not easy. You know, every time you actually go out without an agenda other than just to listen to people, everything you hear challenges your assumptions, your prejudices, your biases, you know. To actually be able to listen and not be very selective about what you hear, that's a challenge. So actually engaging with the communities across Wales, communities that do not feel they have a stake in the Welsh state as it is. I feel, you know, a lot of communities feel like money and inclusivity doesn't seem to get beyond Cardiff a lot of the time. Actually engaging with those communities, listening to what they have to say, listening to people who are at the front line of serving the needs of communities and then developing policy through that, I think that's something that can help.
You said earlier on, probably a little too modestly, that you've got a small amount of celebrity that you're using. I just wonder if, to what end do you want to use that celebrity? You're talking about this now as something needs to change. You've spoken in the past about, you know, wanting to engage more politically. Is this part of you coming more and more into the political world in Wales now?
Yeah, I mean, political with a small p.
Right. But will it ever be with a big P? Will it ever be, you know, in the Assembly, in Parliament, will we ever see anything like that?
If I ever thought that I could be more effective by being in a political party in Wales, then I would do it. At the moment, I feel I can be most effective being outside of political parties, so that I have my own independence, I have my own, you know, financial independence, I have a media platform to a certain extent myself, you know, and I'm able to move fairly freely within different worlds within Wales, bring people together maybe who would normally not want to, even if it's just to have a Twilight DVD signed at the end of it. You know, at least you can get people in a room who wouldn't normally have that conversation. And I find that's the way I can be most effective at the moment. You know, Nairin Bevan said the purpose of power is to give it away. And that's something that I'm beginning to understand a bit more now. I have a voice. So few people in Wales feel they have a voice. So few communities feel they have a voice. And I feel that my voice, the purpose of having a voice now, is to allow it for other people to speak through it a lot of the time. So that's what I'm sort of devoting my time to.
Michael Sheen, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Now, while the current focus